about the research lab in just 5 minutes. The slides are automatically going to advance behind me, so I'm just going to talk and try to keep up with them. And so I'm assuming if you're here that you're interested in graduate school, but how do you know if graduate school is right for you? Well, you could go research it on the internet, or you could ask your advisor, or you could ask your friends. But there's another way that you could try it on, and we think of this kind of like shoe shopping. You might look at a shoe and think, wow, that's really cute, but then when you go try it on, it feels kind of weird and you're not really sure about it. Research labs are like this. You go into a lab to figure out if grad school is right for you. Try it on. Luckily here we have a ton of labs that you can choose from. We have 14 labs to be exact. And don't worry about taking notes. We have all of the labs here to keep up with that, with all the information that I'm going to be talking about. So are you ready? First we have the CDRC, which is Dr. Schulenberg's lab, and they study things like disaster preparedness, the aftermath of disasters, and clinical disaster psychology. And hopefully we won't have to call them after this presentation. Next we have an anxiety lab, Dr. Dixon's lab. She looks at health psychology and anxiety disorders. They're specifically interested in dermatology patients and postpartum and prenatal women. And another health-related lab is Dr. Smitherman's lab, where they research migraines and headaches and physiological factors in that. They mostly do human research, but sometimes they dabble in rat research to look at migraines and rat behavior to simulate human behavior. Another lab that does rats is Dr. Sable's lab. She looks at the neurochemical basis of attention. So basically, they look at rats and see their reaction time and pay attention to their attention. Now, if you're thinking about rats and you're like, oh, that's gross, I don't know about that, that's kind of disgusting, you might be interested in Dr. Mock's lab, who researches disgust, the emotion of disgust. They're starting to look at vomit and how people react to vomit, especially women who are pregnant. And while disgust is one of the basic core emotions, Dr. Mendolia's lab studies all of the emotions. Specifically, they look at facial verbal expression of emotion and the influence of personality and situational factors on the self-regulation of emotion. Another emotion lab is Dr. Layer's lab, the social cognition lab, where they look at how emotions, thinking styles, interact with things like impression formation, moral judgment, stereotyping, and prejudice. One group that might experience these stereotyping and prejudice are international students, which you can learn more about in Dr. Johnson's lab. They look at the adjustment of international students, experiences of students that study abroad, and they do studies with villages around Mount Kilimanjaro. Another lab in our department is Dr. Rison's lab, where Heather is from. They work on how working with others to remember things impacts memory. They look at eyewitness testimony and misinformation effects. Don't worry, all of this information is from primary sources, so they're all good. Another lab that studies memory is Dr. Rebecca Smith and Dr. Hunt's lab. They look at memory and how it changes from young adults to later adults. They look at things like remembering things for the future, false memories, and how to improve memory. And they might have some of our oldest participants, whereas the Cub Lab has some of our youngest participants, where they look at kids in cognitive and social development. If you see kids running around puberty, it's probably for the Cub Lab. And if you're interested in kids, but maybe a little bit older, like teenagers, you might be interested in Dr. Glick's lab. He looks at teenagers and transitioning from being a teenager to an adulthood. Sometimes that's some of our younger college students. And they look at the quality of peer relationships and how it might impact well-being. And when you get a little bit older, sometimes you might be interested in things that Dr. Smith studies, such as interpersonal relationships, sexuality, gender, sexism, individual differences in behavior and personality. Now, speaking of behavior, my lab, which is Dr. Wilson and Dr. Kellum, they run the lab together. We study complex human behavior using behavior analysis and contextual behavioral science. In other words, we quantify things like values and acceptance and study it in really geeky ways. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. John Young's lab, where they conduct a variety of research projects on the spread of scientific information. So how can we take the things that we find in our labs and bring it out to the community to better the lives of humans? And that's it. But don't go away, because we'll have some labbies that are in these labs come in here and answer whatever questions you might have, and they actually got into graduate school by being in labs. So whatever questions you have for them, they'll be able to answer them. And if you're interested in any labs, they're all up here with all the information I just gave you. Thank you.